From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Did Donald Trump make a mistake in choosing J.D. Vance as his running mate? That's what some Republicans are wondering as past statements come back to haunt the senator from Ohio, who is now on the Republican ticket. Plus, who would be the best running mate for Kamala Harris as she gets closer to her selection? Vice presidential politics today on Potomac Watch. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal Opinion Pages, and I'm here with my colleagues, Kate Batchelder Odell and Kimberly Strassel. Welcome. Good to have you here. Let's start with the trials of J.D. Vance, celebrated by the MAGA wing of the Republican Party when he was selected, said to be Donald Trump's choice because he's an envoy to the younger generation at 39 years old and to the working class states of the upper Midwest and Pennsylvania because of his background growing up in Ohio. But so far, it isn't turning out that way. Democrats are jumping on some of Vance's statements in the past when he was running for Senate and emerging as a political figure to suggest that he has disdain for people who have made different lifestyle choices. Let's listen to a clip from Fox News from 2021 when Vance was on with Tucker Carlson.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
All right, that was from 2021. And then after the controversy erupted, he explained what he meant and defended his comments on Trey Gowdy's show on Fox this weekend.
The left has increasingly become explicitly anti-child and anti-family. They've encouraged young families not to have children at all because of concerns over climate change. They've suggested that people who do have children are somehow being selfish, when I think being a parent is actually the most selfless thing that you can do, and again, really does transform your perspective. So this is not a criticism and was never a criticism, Trey, of everybody without children. That is a lie of the left. It is a criticism of the increasingly anti-parent and anti-child attitude of the left.
Well, Kate, how well do you think Senator Vance has handled this controversy?
Well, look, I think it was a mistake to try to double down because he's basically trying to make a much more nuanced point than he did in 2021. I think what's obviously going on, these remarks on Tucker Carlson, this is not where you go if you want to persuade people who might disagree with you. It is a place for catharsis for people who already share the same views. And so he managed to put this in the most offensive terms possible to women who have chosen not to have children. And it's not really a surprise that he said that because Tucker Carlson's video library is well available. So it is odd that whether Trump was aware of it, whether he didn't think it was a big deal, we don't know. But I do think we are in a oddly polarized moment where politicians think that there aren't many swing voters up for grabs, and it influences them to say these things that are popular among some segments of their base. In Trump and Vance's case, some conservative men who think this way, but alienate a huge part of the electorate and women. So I think the left does some of that too. It's part of why Kamala Harris, once she took over the Democratic nomination, got up and started promising various progressive priorities without also making any overtures to the middle either. But I think this is just a regrettable episode because I think it actually really does diminish whatever legitimate points JD may be raising about the future of the country and whether people feel they can raise families and do it successfully.
Well, I also think that his defense was disingenuous in the sense that he was attacking childless in that original comment. He wasn't just attacking Democratic cat ladies. He was attacking people who, for some reason, and not necessarily by choice, don't have children. There are people out there. Not everybody can avail themselves of IVF if they are infertile for some reason. So he was attacking them, and he does so, Kim, as a matter of policy, too, in the sense that he favors, through other statements he's made clear he favors higher tax rates on people who don't have children, single people. And he's now saying, well, I really don't want higher tax rates on them. I just want to subsidize families with children. But the overall ambience of this is, I'm going to punish you if you don't make my lifestyle choice.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are two political fouls going on here, both of which should have and could have been avoided. One is the vetting and not having a response ready for this. The rule of vice presidents is first, do no harm when you are choosing one. And there's that old joke, the best vice presidential candidate is one who is introduced to the nation and never seen again. And the idea that the Trump campaign didn't know some of this was out there and that it didn't have a flawless answer ready to go to put it behind them when and if it was drug out of the ether, I think was a real mistake. And we've seen this before. I mean, let's all remember Sarah Palin and the difficulties that she caused for the McCain ticket. You just do not want your vice president to be the center of attention. But the second thing, as you were just pointing out, Paul, is it's one thing to criticize your opponent. It's another thing to criticize your opponent's supporters. Okay, or just broad swaths of the American voting electorate out there. And it's very similar to Hillary Clinton and her basket of deplorables. There's a lot of people, as you know, when you have Jennifer Aniston, much beloved by a certain generation of women out there, who came out and has been very open about her own difficulties and bearing children, having children, coming out and criticizing your vice presidential candidate, you've stepped into the culture wars in a way that you really should have avoided stepping into them. And he hasn't helped himself at all here. There were quick ways to make this go away, to essentially express a little bit of regret and clarify in a way that made the controversy end, but he's not done that.
Politics for Dummies is getting in a fight with Jennifer Aniston.
Yes. And TMZ. Yeah.
I'm not saying she's infallible, but treating her like she's Elizabeth Warren is not where you want to go. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have more on the trials of J.D. Vance when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel and Kate Odell, and we're talking about the selection of J.D. Vance and what he has had to endure over the last week, how he's handled this trial. I think it's interesting, Kate, and ask the question, did Trump make a mistake by choosing Vance? And I ask that because, as Kim suggested, the debate over much of the last week has been about Vance as a VP choice, not about Kamala Harris. So Kamala Harris has had a kind of a free media run in many respects here. The Republicans want the debate to be about Harris and her viewpoints and her progressive views. They don't want it to be about Vance and his cultural views. And yet that's where we are. I mean, there were other candidates who were available. We know who they were. And Marco Rubio was available. Doug Burgum was available. Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, was available. And right to the end, we know that Trump was considering Youngkin and Rubio in particular, and yet he went with Vance. And what I think one of the reasons Trump picked Vance was it was a very confident Trump. He was on the road to beating Biden. He knew he was going to thump Biden. And he thought, okay, I'll make the pick of going to this younger generation. He'll be the future of the MAGA movement. And they missed the possibility that this could be something of a problem in this election year.
Well, they also, I think, really underestimated the possibility that Joe Biden might get out of the race. At the time, Biden had hung on after his bad debate performance for weeks, and it looked like he might ride it out. And so I think Trump wrongly assumed that the ground wasn't going to shift dramatically beneath him again, and that was incorrect. And, you know, I do think there's something to the prediction that Nikki Haley made a year ago that the first party to abandon their geriatric candidate will win the election. So I do think just the mere new candidate of Kamala injected something new into the race. I'd also add, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but just on the vice presidential stakes, she could extract an even bigger price for the J.D. Vance pick if she goes with somebody who has high favorability ratings, is popular, you know, Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor. That could make the choice even more perhaps regrettable for Trump. And lastly, just real quick, I would add one reason to think about this episode is that Glenn Youngkin, the Virginia governor, has had some success building winning coalitions that do focus on some cultural issues facing parents right now. He has run on banning TikTok, getting kids less online, improving their school options. I mean, so he has managed to talk about some similar problems that I think going on in parents' lives and their decision to have more kids in a way that is optimistic and not alienating. And that is obviously what you'd like to see Mr. Vance here pivot to.
Of course, the the history of vice presidential choices is that in the end, they don't matter all that much to the campaign. The voters make their choice fundamentally about the person at the top of the ticket. But it does matter to governing, and it can matter to some extent if the debate is all over your vice president. Now, Sarah Palin, was arguably a liability in the end for John McCain. One of the things, Kim, that I'm hearing is comparing J.D. Vance to the selection of Dan Quayle, who was George H.W. Bush's choice for vice president. He was also said to be a generational pick. Senator Quayle at the time was much younger than H.W. Bush. But I have to say, I know Dan Quayle. He's a friend of mine. And Dan Quayle has it all over J.D. Vance when it comes to experience and maturity as a selection. And I have a lot more respect for him, the way he handled his travails than J.D. Vance has. But let me ask you, Kim, should Donald Trump dump J.D. Vance at this point?
I think it's unlikely.
But should he?
I mean, look, yes, I think there are far better vice presidential candidates he could have chosen, he should have chosen. And we're just seeing the beginning of this. I would note that as well, too. This is just starting. It's not going to get better. There has been a lot that J.D. Vance has said over the years, not just when he was running for the Senate, but in the years when he was first dipping his toe into politics, having been an author of note that people started seeing in interviews on TV. And he's got a lot of really interesting and unusual views. And in fact, you can look at Democratic talking points. One thing that's great about that party is it doesn't take long for you to figure out what they've all been told to say. And the new favorite word every one of them is using for J.D. Vance is, he's really weird. Just look at this guy. He's so weird. He is not someone that is from the world that you are from. This sort of young, over-intellectualized person with a lot of really goofy fundamentalist views on a number of things. And the Kamala camp, they're now going to try to, as Kate suggests, they're going to use this as a new contrast point, because before it was Joe Biden was too old and you're going to get Kamala. Now it's, look at Donald Trump. He's the oldest guy running in this race. J.D. Vance is one heartbeat away from the presidency. That's really scary because he's really weird. So I think the Trump campaign will resist this because it would make them the party briefly of chaos. But a lot more thought should have gone into this at the beginning.
Interesting. The weird line. I don't think that's fair.
I don't either.
Yeah. I know J.D. Vance a little. I think he's smug. I think he can be condescending, but he's not weird. He's just got some views that he thinks make him morally superior to you and me. And that, I think, can be a political problem. Kate, do you think Trump should dump Vance?
At this point, I think he's really unlikely to do so. Whether he could get a boost from doing so is hard to know because he would have to reconvene Republicans, and it might neuter a little bit the line that, the Democrats are the ones who can't decide who's running. I think he's pretty stuck now, even if he might have made a mistake. I do think he can still influence Vance in constructive directions. I mean, it seems to me like for all the discussion about Vance's dark cultural undertones that he references so frequently, it seems to me like what appealed to Trump about Vance was his compelling biographical story of upward mobility from Ohio to Yale Law School. And that had a lot of influence on it. So if you read Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy from 2016, it talks a lot about how the things he experienced growing up in poverty, he encountered a lot of adults who made bad choices and who were unable to comport themselves with the disciplines for showing up for work, and how he was able to get out of that bad cycle of poverty and poor life choices. And so I think that there is a lot there that Americans admire in what he's done with his life and marrying the daughter of Indian immigrants and raising a successful family. So I do think if Trump can convince Vance to go back to this optimistic message, at least in some sense, of his own book, there is a potential for him to have more political appeal. I also think his wife, Usha's speech at the convention was warm and understated, and she is another asset to him potentially if she is out on the trail with him, and he makes him look much less coarse and, like you said, perhaps condescending to women if he's married to this brilliant former Supreme Court clerk. So I think there is a chance for Vance to pivot, but he's obviously surrounded himself with folks who are telling him not to do that.
I agree with you both that Trump is unlikely. This change running mates would dominate the news even more for a couple of weeks, and that would be problematic, very problematic for the campaign at this stage.